Forget the treasure chests overflowing with gold. Forget the swashbuckling sword fights and the skull and crossbones flags snapping in the wind. The popular image of a pirate is a fantasy. The reality was far grittier, far more desperate, and the most valuable prize on the seven seas wasn't gold or jewels. It was something you and I take for granted every single day, a single, clean glass of water. The biggest, most relentless enemy a pirate ever faced wasn't the Royal Navy. It was dehydration. And their story of survival is one of the most ingenious, and sometimes disgusting, tales of human resourcefulness ever told. If you love uncovering the gritty, hidden truths of history, the kind of stories that change how you see the world, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button. We dig up the tales that have been buried deeper than any treasure. Now, picture this. You're on a wooden ship in the 1700s, under the scorching Caribbean sun. The ship is stocked for months with salted beef and hardtack biscuits, food so dry it could last forever. But the water, that's a different story. The water stored in wooden barrels would, within weeks, transform into a vile, wriggling stew of algae and bacteria. It became so thick and foul you could practically chew it. The average pirate needed at least a gallon of water a day just to function in that oppressive heat. For a crew of just 50 men, that's 50 gallons a day. A month-long voyage required thousands of gallons. Suddenly, water wasn't just a drink, it was liquid gold, and finding it became the crew's single most important mission. When desperation took hold, some pirates made a fatal mistake. They tried drinking seawater. It seems logical, right? Water is water. But it was a horrifically bad idea. Human kidneys can't process that much salt. Drinking seawater paradoxically makes you more dehydrated, as your body uses up its own fresh water reserves trying to flush out the overwhelming salt. There are gruesome accounts of pirates who, maddened by thirst, drank from the ocean, only to suffer violent sickness and a much faster, more agonizing death. Some even tried mixing seawater with wine or rum, thinking the alcohol would somehow purify it. It didn't. It just created a vile cocktail of sickness that made their situation 100 times worse. So, how did they survive? They had to become masters of the elements, turning their entire world into a water-gathering system. Their first and greatest hope came from the sky. When dark clouds gathered on the horizon, it wasn't a sign of a bad omen. It was a miracle. The moment the first drop of rain fell, the entire ship would explode into a frenzy of organized chaos. The deck would become a giant water-catching machine. Those massive canvas sails, normally used to catch the wind, were angled to become enormous funnels. Crew members would scramble up the rigging, adjusting the sails to create water channels, guiding the precious rain down toward the deck. There were even arguments over who got to manage the forward sails, because everyone knew they caught the cleanest water, with less accumulated bird droppings from the weeks at sea. Every surface was used. The wooden railings and gutters, designed to keep seawater off the deck, now became highways for fresh water, channeling it into every barrel, pot, and container they could find. Some pirates even carved extra grooves into the deck planks to direct the flow. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The first few minutes of a storm, what they called the deck's bath, washed away weeks of salt, grime, and bird business. Only after this initial rinse would they begin collecting. In the middle of a downpour, you'd see the whole crew engaged in a desperate ballet, some holding their hats upside down, others stripping off their shirts to soak them and wring them out into barrels. It was a bizarre, frantic dance for survival. But you can't command the clouds. Weeks could pass under a clear, mocking sky. That's when pirates had to become expert water hunters on land. Forget treasure maps. The most secret and valuable charts on a pirate ship were those marking the locations of freshwater springs and rivers. A reliable water source was a secret worth killing for. On land, they knew the tricks. They didn't just look for any green plants. They knew that lush ferns and thick, low-lying grasses were far better indicators of groundwater than a simple palm tree. They became amateur engineers, digging seepage wells about 50 feet from the shore. They'd dig a hole in the sand and wait. Slowly, fresh groundwater, naturally filtered by the sand, would seep in, leaving the salt behind. It was a simple but brilliant technique. Their greatest trick, however, was listening to the animals. They became expert bird watchers. Birds need to drink, and by observing their flight patterns, especially in the early morning or late afternoon, a pirate crew could follow them directly to a hidden spring or stream. One pirate captain wrote in his journal about following a flock of parrots to the best water source he'd ever found, complaining that the birds screeched at him the whole way, as if mocking his desperation. But finding water was only half the battle. Now they had to keep it. The wooden barrels were a microscopic war zone. The heat and humidity turned them into perfect incubators for bacteria. The water would go live, as they called it, because you could literally see tiny creatures swimming in it. One pirate described it as drinking a mouthful of wiggling worms with every sip. To fight this, they developed techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. They began charring the inside of their barrels, scorching the wood until it was black. This layer of charcoal acted as a natural filter, absorbing impurities and slowing the growth of bacteria, the same principle used in modern water filters. They also discovered that dropping silver coins into the barrels kept the water fresh for longer. They had no idea about the antibacterial properties of silver ions, but they knew through trial and error that it worked. It was like alchemy, turning silver into life. When the water inevitably turned foul, they had to filter it. The simplest method was pouring the gunky water through a piece of cloth to catch the worms and algae. But the more clever crews built multi-layer filtration systems using barrels filled with sand, crushed seashells, and even bits of coral, mimicking the way the earth naturally purifies water. And that brings us to their most famous, and most misunderstood, solution: alcohol. Most people think pirates drank rum because they were rowdy partiers. That's only half the story. Rum was a tool of survival. They mixed it with their fall water to create a drink called grog. The alcohol was just strong enough to kill off some of the worst bacteria, while the lime juice they often added fought off scurvy. It was a brilliant, two-in-one solution, a water purifier and a vitamin supplement in a single cup. The official recipe, first introduced in the British Navy by an admiral nicknamed Old Grog, was 1 part rum to 4 parts water. Pirates, of course, borrowed the idea and perfected their own recipes, adding sugar or spices. Grog wasn't just a drink, it was a rationing system. Each sailor got a daily ration, which ensured the precious water supply wasn't consumed too quickly. Daily life on a pirate ship was scheduled around grog time. You didn't raid a ship or start a fight until after the day's rations had been served. So the next time you see a pirate in a movie, swinging a sword and yelling about gold, remember the truth. Their real life was a constant, desperate, and incredibly clever war against thirst. They were meteorologists who read the clouds, botanists who understood the plants, engineers who built filters from scratch, and chemists who used rum and silver to make water safe. Their greatest treasure wasn't buried on some forgotten island. It was the ingenuity that allowed them to survive, one precious, hard-won drop at a time.